Number 1. This happened to me about 6 to 7 years ago. I think I was 17. So it was the beginning of the summer, and I was traveling to my summer home like I did every summer. I live in a small southeastern European country, and this is pretty normal for most people here. I would usually travel by train overnight because I would get to sleep most of the trip. The train took about 8 hours. It didn't cross a great distance, but was just really slow. Anyway, I have done the same trip alone a couple of times already and never had a problem. Also, my country is pretty safe, so taking this trip on my own was never really a concern for me or my parents. The train left at 11 p.m. and was scheduled to arrive at 7 in the morning, meaning I had 7 to 8 hours of sleep, which was great. At first I was alone in my compartment, but after I got settled in, a girl about my age asked me if she could join me in my compartment, and I said yes. We started talking a bit. You know the usual. Where are you from? How old are you? What do you do? Even though I was comfortable traveling alone and was bigger than her and a year older, I was happy she was there. We talked until midnight and then decided to try and get some sleep. Since the train was pretty empty and it was just the two of us in our compartment, we could both lie down. The compartment had 3 seats on each side, so we each spread across 3 seats. I had just started dozing off when I heard our compartment door opening. There was a man standing at the door. He looked at us for a second and then asked,
"Do you have any room for me?"
Now, what was weird about this was that, first of all, the train was pretty empty, so I was certain there were other completely empty compartments. Secondly, he saw us both lying down, taking up all the space, so there really was no need to ask. And finally, it was the way he phrased it. Do we have any room for him? In the moment he asked this, I was still not sleeping. I squirmed a little bit and started to answer, but he left the second I started squirming. I remember him closing the door as I was about to answer, and I thought it was weird, but whatever. My sleepy brain didn't want to bother, so I forgot about it instantly. I think the girl and I exchanged a WTF look, and that was it. However, not more than 5 minutes passed and he was back. Again the same. He opened the door and asked if we had any room for him. I was a stupid, scared kid back then, so I just stayed silent and pretended to sleep. Luckily, the girl was smarter than me, even though she looked timid, and she just sort of yelled at him, "No! Can't you see there's no room? We're trying to sleep!" He just closed the door and left. I kind of chuckled, probably my nerves. She smiled at me, and that was it. The girl and I went our separate ways in the morning, as we were both traveling further. I didn't have Facebook back then, so I didn't stay in contact with her, and I had forgotten her name over the years, although for some reason now, as I'm writing this, Ivana rings a bell. I will, however, be forever grateful to her for possibly saving me that night and for teaching me you can always stand up for yourself, even if you are a small, fragile-looking girl. We didn't get a good look at the guy because it was dark, but my impression back then was that he was between 30 and 40, so he had no business to hang out with us. And if he wanted to sleep, he had plenty of empty compartments. That is why I think he had something else in mind. I was so happy the girl was there because I have no idea what I would have done on my own. I'd like to think I would have stood up for myself, but honestly, I don't know. Number 2. This story takes place in America in the early 1980s, before my mom was married. She lived with her sister's husband, and their 3 dogs. My mother's family is from Ireland, and so is my aunt's husband. His sister, Mary Catherine, was visiting the States for a few weeks. During the daytime, everyone worked, so it was just Mary Catherine at home with the 3 dogs. Princess, a German Shepherd Standard Collie mix, Kelly, a German Shepherd Husky, and Mickey, a massive illegal wolf mix. All 3 dogs were big hams, but fiercely protective. One day, my mom came home from work to find the lights turned out, shades drawn, and doors locked. She thought maybe Mary Catherine had gone for a walk, but when she opened the door, she met Mary, standing white as a sheet, with a knife in her hand. "Oh, Patsy, something terrible's happened today. We had a visitor," she spoke. Around noon, Mary was in the kitchen fixing herself some lunch when she heard the front door open. The dogs went crazy, howling and barking. The dogs never barked at family, so she went to see who it was. It was a man. A man she had never seen before let himself in through the unlocked door and was sitting on the couch. The dog stood on the staircase landing adjacent to the couch and refused to go near him. Before she could ask who he was, he said,
"I'm very thirsty. Could you give me a drink of water?"
She figured he was just a neighbor, or maybe his car had broken down. The house was situated in a remote and relatively safe area, so she didn't think of him as a threat. Plus, she was from a small village where she knew everyone, and unexpected guests were the norm for her. He sat on the sofa so casually, like he was waiting for someone. She said hello and went into the kitchen to get him a drink, ushering the dogs in with her to avoid making a fuss. They were very angry, growling at the man with their hackles raised, but they hadn't approached him. She had her back turned at the kitchen sink, filling up a glass for him, when she felt a hand clap on her shoulder. "Are you waiting on someone? The family won't be home for a while," Mary said nervously.
"I know they won't,"
the man replied coldly. Mary whipped around to face the man.
"You know,
He said,
you're a good-looking woman, and I'm a good-looking man."
The dogs backed up against her, barking and howling. She reached behind her to grab a knife off the block in one hand and the glass of water in the other. "I think you should drink your water and be on your way." The man stood and drank the water while Mary stood there with the dogs. She watched him place the glass on a table, open the door, go down the steps, and walk into the street until she lost sight of him. Once everyone was home, my mother called the police. There wasn't much they could do, since Mary wasn't hurt, and they hadn't heard any reports of break-ins or assaults lately, so they just took a statement. My family always tells this story as an example of how the Irish tend to downplay unfortunate situations almost humorously. The Irish comedian Tommy Tiernan calls this a fundamental darkness that the Irish people have. We laugh at the blackness in life. But it leaves a lot of questions unanswered. Had that man been watching the house to know everyone's schedule, knew that Mary wasn't from around here, and was going to use that to take advantage of her? Or was he just a wandering creep, looking for unlocked doors? Number 3. I was raised in a very religious family. It was made clear from the start that I was to study theology in order to trap a suitable mate, marry, reproduce, and live the life of a wife and mother. That was my destiny. I was fine with that until I hit my teens and started to question most of what I had been told. This, in the long run, led up to what I'd like to refer to as the Great Family Breakdown of 2000. I was 18, and I had my mind set on 1. Not study theology, 2. spend a year backpacking and working in interesting places, and 3, eventually come back home and become a veterinarian, possibly never marry or have kids. This, of course, resulted in first my father, then my entire family disowning me. Well, mostly because of the not reading theology bit, but you get the general circumstance under which I grew up. So naturally, I also picked up smoking out of pure spite. The rebellion streak really appealed to the teenage me. So in the spring of 2000, I set out on my adventure. I had a very undetailed plan: travel through Italy, France, see the romantic historical places, continue to England and sip on an overly priced but very, I assumed, sophisticated plastic cup of coffee while enjoying the slow turning of the London Eye. The plan was to get odd jobs along the way. It seemed so easy in all the movies I had seen since breaking free of my overly religious family. I was, to sum it up, a very naive 18-year-old girl with no life experience. In June, I arrived in Italy. I had almost no money left and did what came natural to me in times of need. I turned to the closest church. It was a beautiful day, a beautiful church, and I enjoyed the chilly air inside the stone walls when I became aware that I was being watched. I turned around and saw a nice-looking man in his late 20s smiling gently at me and asking something in Italian. His English was almost as bad as my Italian, but we managed to introduce ourselves as Gabriella and Franco. Franco, it turned out, was some sort of volunteer keeping the church and its surroundings tidy. He invited me to a garden barbecue that evening with people from the church choir, and it was a wonderful experience. Soon I had a job helping a gardener, and life was wonderful. The people were welcoming and sweet, and I started to learn a little Italian. It was like one of those movies. But some days, when I went into the church in the late afternoon to light a candle and admire the great artworks, I could feel Franco watching me in a way that I was not entirely comfortable with. What made me go from finding him charming to slightly unnerving was, however, how he held one hand on the back of my neck when we walked out of the church that first afternoon. Something about that made me uneasy. In my, admittedly, limited experience, you hold another person's hand, rest a hand on their arm, possibly even on the small of their back, but the back of the neck? It felt strange, and I disliked it right away, but disregarded my first impression with the fact that I did not know their customs. Then I got used to it, thinking it must just be his ways. He was always polite and even shy in our awkward conversations, often avoiding direct eye contact and keeping his distance whenever anyone else was there. When in company, he would become almost invisible, shrinking into himself. It was strange to see, and I thought maybe it's some sort of social phobia. Perhaps he had been given the job there because he had some sort of invisible handicap that made it hard for him to function in a social setting. When others were around, he became someone else, much more introverted and elusive. Weeks went by, and he started to hang out close to where I worked. He was often close by when I took my evening walks, and I started to get a lingering feeling that something was not right with him. But I didn't fear him, and I didn't wish to seem rude. When I had let several days pass without returning to the church, he came to the house where I rented a room to ask for me and wondered if perhaps I was ill since I had not turned up for our evening walks. In retrospect, this should have made me pack my bags and get on a bus, but remember, I was a very naive person at the time. So instead, when he held out a hand to invite me for a walk, I took it, ignoring the feeling of danger that started to brew somewhere deep inside my chest. We walked past the place where the bus usually stops, where I usually turn around to walk back home, because there's nothing more to see down that road. As soon as we were away from the busier street, his hand let go of mine, and he placed it instead on the back of my neck, mumbling Italian words at a pace I could not follow or comprehend. I tried being polite and nice, turning into the friendly, nice girl that I was brought up to be. It had no effect as to ease his iron grip or slow him down, and soon we were on a lonely street that I remembered led to a closed dairy factory. You would have thought that my instincts would kick in now, right? Yeah, I wish. I thought that I could cure his sudden aggressive behavior with friendly, polite manner and charm. I know it sounds almost insane how I just let this happen, but remember that I was trained from toddlerhood to be a nice girl, to not fuss, not raise my voice. I found my voice that day. It took some time, I admit that, but when I found myself backed up against the concrete wall of a dark and empty factory house and saw the hostile look in his eyes as he pulled a small knife out of his pocket, I completely flipped. I screamed, scratched, kicked, and clawed. It was the kind of knife that you use for opening boxes, small and thin, but probably dangerous enough nonetheless. He was so shocked by my sudden violent fit that he dropped it, and I took my chance to run. I didn't care where I ran. I just ran, like a crazed animal, all while screaming unarticulated nonsense. I lost both my sandals, but kept running. I didn't even look over my shoulder to see if I was even being chased. I just ran. I reached the first house on the street and threw myself at the door, knocking, kicking, shouting, until it opened and a terrified young woman, the teacher in the village, let me in. I didn't report it to the police. I left the next day on the first bus, but I regret that decision today. At the time, I was too embarrassed and ashamed to talk to the police, and it would take time to get a translator to do it properly anyway. I just wanted to go. It was a very frightening experience, but I did learn something fundamentally important. If needed, never hesitate to fight with everything you've got. You can't make a predator go away by being nice and polite. Creepy Mina here of the Worst Nightmare channel. I hope you enjoyed those 3 stories of women who were either in Europe or from Europe who had creepy encounters. I think the one thing they all had in common that they learned that they had to be a little rude in order to stay safe. Please remember to send your stories to either Willing Stories, the subreddit, or the website Bros Grim, so that small channels like me can continue to grow. And also, do send your stories to me personally at creepymina@gmail.com if you'd like to hear them narrated on this channel. Please give me a thumbs up, comment below, tell me how you liked my Irish accent. I gave it a shot. I think I did pretty good. Share on your favorite social networking platform. And always remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and stay safe.